All right.
Hi. So
Morning.
thanks, Chris. Really happy to be here today, talk about something that's very important to us at Hewlett Packard Enterprise Cybersecurity. So Chris may have mentioned, I am actually going to talk a little bit about the sort of evolving threat landscape and how that's changed and what we do at HPE in order to deal with that and address it. Then I'm going to hand over to Antonio. So I've been working in cybersecurity for 20-ish years. And really, the threat landscape has changed significantly. So when I started out, cyber events happened maybe once a year, at least something that was headline-worthy. The scale of them, we were horrified when it was maybe 10,000 or 100,000 records that were involved in a data breach. And usually, the attackers, the people responsible, were what we refer to as script kiddies. But that's completely changed, and you've heard part of that in the earlier panel today. So now we're talking about a scale and a sophistication and a speed of cyber threat that has completely shifted how we have to think and what we have to do. So instead of things happening on a yearly basis, we're now dealing with threats that really are occurring on a daily basis, big headlines. And we're talking about millions and millions of records in a single data breach. So as we look at that, we also look at the profile of the adversary that we're dealing with. And it's not script kiddies anymore. As I mentioned earlier, we have now nation states as well as hacktivists who are doing things for ideological reasons. And additionally, cybercrime is big business. It is a $1 trillion business globally. That is a lot of motivation and a lot of resource that we have to respond to. And on top of all that, my job used to be a lot easier where basically we could take our critical assets, drop them in a data center, stick up a firewall, and feel good about things. Whereas today, we're in a highly connected, mobile, hybrid environment. And your data is sitting in a data center, in a cloud, on devices on the edge. And for those devices, we've hit a tipping point this year where the number of devices now significantly outnumbers the number of human beings on this planet. It's about 11 billion to about 7 billion. And all of those things have data, and how are we going to protect that data? So as we look at it as a company, we really think about things holistically and very pragmatically. And when we do that, we think about the simple things of people, process, and technology, but with a very new lens of the threat landscape we're dealing with. So when it comes to technology, for instance, we adamantly believe that security has to be built into the very core of what we do. It is about securing your applications with your development lifecycle. It is about building into your firmware and your hardware, what we call the silicon root of trust. And it's also about how you protect all your data, everything from how you deliver your service, how you interact with your customers and organizations. You have to think about security from that point. We also look at the speed at which a threat occurs. Weaponization used to take months. Now we're talking in terms of weeks and days and sometimes hours from point of vulnerability to when something is weaponized. So as we look at that technology piece, we have to also apply artificial intelligence and machine learning to be able to quickly detect. So that intelligence is incredibly important in order to be able to respond. And speed of automation and how you respond really deals with, allows us to react quickly. Then on process, as Chris already mentioned, we've adopted best practices from all over. We've taken from the government the notion of a fusion center, where that really shifts our operation from being something that is reactive after an event has occurred or while an event is occurring to something that is truly intelligence-driven and proactive. And then the final piece of what we look at is obviously the people. Cybersecurity skills are really hard to find these days. The latest reports are stating that we are going to have over 3 million vacancies in cybersecurity by 2020. So if you can't find the resources as an organization, you really have to invest in developing and supporting those resources. But to add to that, it isn't really just a subset of your organization that looks after cybersecurity. Everybody is touching the digital world. And so we take it seriously and look at the fact that everyone in our organization, no matter what your job is, no matter what your role is trained on cyber. So with all of those different components moving, what do we worry about going forward? Well, it's manipulation of data. So I don't know if you've heard about, there's a project that was run out of MIT, and an AI was built, and his name is Norman. And he was affectionately named Norman after Norman Bates in the Alfred Hitchcock movie Psycho, because Norman is the first psychopath AI. And the premise of the research was that while we often worry about the algorithm, what is the effect of the data that actually trains that algorithm? So Norman was image recognition. And instead of being trained on the standard set of images, they trained him on very graphic depictions of death that were taken from the internet. And as a result, when Norman was presented with an ink blot graphic, where other AIs saw a black and white baseball glove, Norman saw basically a man with a machine gun committing murder in broad daylight. That's a very different outcome. So as we think about the world that we live in, where we have AI, machine learning, and it's part of our financial institutions, industry, our defense systems, we have to look at protecting our the algorithm, but we also have to look at the integrity of the data that we train that on. So it's a lot to think about and a lot of things that we talk about and why we take it so seriously. And so, Antonio, maybe you can give your perspective.
Well, good morning. First of all, I want to thank the Washington Post for giving us the opportunity to speak to you today, even though we have limited time. Again, I'm the president and CEO of Hewlett Packard Enterprise. To Liz's point, think about even our own company. We are a company of 66,000 employees that operates in 170 countries, that generates an enormous amount of data, and most importantly, an enormous amount of intellectual property. So how we protect that intellectual property. I was just here upstairs hosting a CIO roundtable with many of the government agencies, and I can tell you 80% of the time in that conversation was dominated by cybersecurity. And so we think about cybersecurity, in the context how we build cyber controls and practices in our technologies and in our processes. And one way to do it, obviously, is by Liz and my team working together with my engineering team, thinking about what are the toughest issues that customers are dealing with. The reality is that the data is exploding. And 75% of that data actually is not created in the cloud or in the data center. It's created here. In fact, many of you are holding the phones and are digitizing this conversation and you're doing something. Everything computes in our life. But fundamentally, it's how we protect that interaction between the user and the data in a way that protects our intellectual property, because data is the new currency. So we think about protection in three forms, right? So one is obviously protection built in the core, second is detection, and third is recovery. Because the fact of the matter is something's going to happen. And the question is how you recover as fast as possible. So in the context of our innovation agenda, thinking about this edge-to-cloud architecture where edge is an extension of the cloud, and at the core of that is this data fabric, how we build cyber controls and practices at the core of that data fabric. So an example of that is what we have done with our Silicon Root of Trust at the infrastructure level. So how we build security at the core of that infrastructure. So every server platform we sell today actually has a Silicon Root of Trust. Think about the fingerprint. Every human has one fingerprint that's unique. And in that case, we put those cyber capabilities inside that platform. Think about the fact that now we have encryption in everything we do. So our storage platform has encryption built in our hard drives, in our flash solutions. But then when you go to the detection side of this, think about this edge where you're connecting wirelessly. Today, now we actually can monitor the behavior of the users on the network to understand what they are doing and ultimately score the user in a way that we have not been able to do before, not just at the infrastructure level, but at the application level. And last but not least is how we recover, because in the end, when you see some of the cyber attacks, it takes sometimes weeks and months. A few months ago, we had the cyber attack in one of the enterprise customers that had to rebuild the entire server virtualization farm, and it took them weeks to recover. So we think about this as a continuum, but the one thing we're doing, because we have a very large infrastructure ourselves, is how we work together between Liz's organization and my team in the engineering side to figure out how we actually productize these solutions so we can sell it to you and you can deploy it faster. But ultimately, our core mission, our core purpose as a company is how we advance the way we live and work. And at the core of that is not only protecting ourselves, but making our contribution so we can provide sustainable technologies and ultimately a moral code, particularly as we think about embedded technologies like AI, they are utilized the right way. And this is a very important aspect that obviously is becoming a big debate. You gave the case of Norman here, but the reality, we need to think about this in the context of the society and the way we live, but ultimately also protect the business and then make that contribution to the society in a way that honestly has to be accelerated. So unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time, but I'm really proud of the work we are doing. We are here to help you in many ways, shape, form. We already have solutions available to the market. Please engage us with your toughest problem. We would love to help you. So with that, I would like now to pass it back to the Washington Post because our time is up. All right? Thank you very much.